Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, July 12th in 2012, and I guess Thursday morning only here, but not in other time zones. But that makes this YUI Open Hours, and I'm here with Eric Ferreiro and Diego and Fabian. Frank, Diego is not Frank. Actually, Diego, I apologize. I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name. Uh, but they are from the Mojito team, and that's what we're going to be talking about this week. We've spent quite a bit of time, actually, in the last month or so talking about Mojito, but in the last couple of open hours that we spent prior to the TreeView open hours, we were talking about Mojito in the capacity of Access, which is an application that's built on top of Mojito, but it is definitely a more advanced application, and we figured we'd owe it to you guys to go over a little bit more introductory level stuff, just to help get started, because it's actually a new and pretty exciting technology stack to check it out. So, um, yes, Satyam. Yeah, I'll just stick to Satyam, thanks. Um, so let's see, before we get into the details of Mojito, why don't we go over the news? Eric, you have some details about the release schedule and some other stuff that you want to talk about?
Yes. So we are working towards a code freeze for 3.6.0, which is tomorrow, Friday the 13th. So hopefully all goes well for that. And let's see, we're planning to do the 3.6.0 PR4 release, which should be the last PR for 3.6.0 before the GA release. We're planning to do that on, it looks like Tuesday the 17th is when we should expect. So basically the beginning of next week, a new 3.6.0 PR will be out, PR4. Um, and yeah, we'll want people to start testing that as soon as we get it out, to let us know if there's any last minute bugs or issues that we need to fix, documentation or anything, and then we can fix those before the GA release.
That's a good distinction, actually. That while the PR4 is going to be the last preview release before GA, it is primarily for identifying those critical bugs that we just can't launch unless they get fixed. So there shouldn't be a lot of deviation from PR4 before the actual GA. But if you're talking about documentation, that's something different. So we can do the live docs, we can do all sorts of things like that. And so if you wanted to contribute any of anything into the documentation, that still has just as much capacity, just as much likelihood to get into the code before GA as anything. Am I correct?
Yeah, you are. And then even after the release, people all the time are issuing pull requests to our live docs branch, which is what the website reflects. And so we can update, documentation only changes or adding new examples, any of that kind of stuff to update the website even after the release has happened. And so we've been getting a lot more of those contributions and pull requests lately. And that's great, because improving the documentation is definitely makes the library better and is an easy way to contribute to the project. And then some other stuff, speaking of contributing, Luke, if you want to look at the active development on 3.6.0 heading under there, I think there's a link. So this is on our wiki page on GitHub on the YUI3 project. It's wiki. And what we try to do here is keep a running list of code reviews and design proposals, things that we're actively working on or discussing or trying to come up with solutions for or proposing solutions for. And as we can see, the code reviews, there's a few of these going on, and usually what these are pull requests to the project. So they're more like long-lived pull requests where people can add feedback. Commits will be added to them over time. And so one recent one was Ryan Grove added lazy model list to the app framework, and this is a new component to deal with thousands of uh, thousands of objects, say, that represent data for models inside of a list, without having the cost associated with that, both in instantiation and memory. So so lazy model list lazily
And so it's
instantiates
basically just
the model
storing a lot of It's basically just storing a lot of objects. It's just as raw objects, so we're avoiding any sort of complexity unless you need the complexity if you're actually doing any sort of mutation on those objects and those sorts of things, in which case there's, what is there, a revive method or something like that to
Yep,
create a model from one of the core objects. Yeah.
correct. Yeah, and so that that component was growing out of like a real world use case, and so Ryan was able to get that in, and we did a code review on it, and now it will be in 3.6.0. TreeView also has the ongoing pull request, which you can still add feedback to, and base events is one that we were looking at extracting the separating the events part of base out of the core. So we have base core and y.base, and base events can be mixed into y.core or y.base core to bring it back to y.base effectively. So this is just some organizational stuff that I've been working on. And then also model sync REST is a RESTful HTTP sync layer that uses I/O under the hood, and that's for transmitting data to and from a server.
I thought that there was some hope that Model Sync REST was going to be getting into core for
Yep.
3.6.
Yeah, that's my plan. So I have an open pull request on it. I've been getting feedback on it and adding to it, and what I have left to do is finishing the unit test for that, and then I plan to be merging it in hopefully today. So.
Oh, okay, excellent. So get your feedback in now. But that one's a pretty stable module that's existed in the gallery for a long time and has been fairly well tested in real world. So there's, I guess, less of a concern about bringing that into PR4, where we normally do feature freeze at PR2. And of course, we snuck in TreeView for PR3, which is, again, a special case. One thing that I'm curious about, though, Eric, is the TreeView pull request. So now TreeView exists in PR3, and so the plan on record is that it's going to be shipping with 3.6.0. So then what's the TreeView pull request doing in code review section?
It could simply just be that no one has, basically crossed it out like lazy model list above it. But there has been some ongoing discussion in the forums, people giving feedback. So it's kind of, there still may be some things that happen to it, or waiting to be merged in. I believe Gonzalo opened another pull request for it too, for additional bug fixes and that sort of thing. So, still in flux there. So I think that's why it's just left open like that, just to note that we're still looking for feedback on that component.
Mm-hmm.
But,
cool.
yeah, I think that's.
And there's definitely some other performance gains to be made in. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so
the delay is killing me
so
here.
there's some. Yeah, it is. There's some other performance stuff that's being worked on, but it's low level in the library, and so since so many things depend on that code, like at the event level, we're not going to make that change this late in PR or 3.6.0. So instead, it will move into 3.7.0, and it'll be out in the first PR for 3.7.0. So some of that performance work.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's
Excellent.
it more or less for the news. We're just trying to hammer away at getting things buttoned up and ready for code freeze and ready to release PR4 next week.
So PR4 comes next week, and then what's the time frame between PR4 and GA?
Let's see. It looks like 2 weeks. So that would bring us to probably the last day in July, but more likely in the first week of August we should be able to get this out. Um, so.
All right.
So yeah, 2 weeks after PR4, assuming that there's no like big problems and things that come in late.
Yeah, it's exploding stuff, right? Um, all right. So, well, let's get back on track then. So we're going to be talking about Mojito. So let's talk about Mojito. Actually, I think I am not the right person to be talking about this, although I was digging around some of the pages out on GitHub, and of course you can actually go back to out on YDN. There is a nice page here. I'll drop this in the chat, talking about Mojito. And that it looks like there's a pretty decent amount of documentation there. And actually, you know what? I think at this point, probably best for me to just pass control over to Diego, who is there with Fabian, and they are going to do the walking through. So why don't you guys start out? I've stopped sharing my screen, so you guys can share screen now. Why don't you guys start out by discussing a little bit about the relationship between Mojito and the larger cocktails suite? What is cocktails, and how does Mojito fall into that relationship?
All right. So Cocktails is a mobile application development framework based off web standards, which basically is an umbrella. It's an umbrella of other small platforms. For example, Mojito is one of them, and basically allows you to start from scratch an application. You write your application and using, for example, another let's say another product under the umbrella of Cocktail, which is Manhattan, you can deploy it. And also Cocktail provides you the tools to packaging, to do the packaging, to do testing, to do the docs. So it's pretty much a whole environment to write your application. So Mojito is like one of the pieces, which is the one we're going to talk about today. And this is the one who allows you to create the application itself, like a web application for multiple devices. And we're going to talk about all these amazing features, at least some of them, during this hour.
Sounds good. So, where do you want to start? Do you want to start just there on YDN, or did you have something you want to show?
Just to be on the same page. So we're gonna start doing a little presentation, just a couple of slides to understand from start what we're gonna do. We're gonna build an application from scratch that you guys can download or clone or fork from GitHub. We're gonna show the URL. And we're going to go over this application, seeing the most interesting features of Mojito. Yeah, pretty much that's our agenda for today.
Awesome. Oh, it looks like you got a slide deck and everything all set to go. Cool.
All right. So we're going to start. We're going to present ourselves. I'm Diego. I'm working from the search platform team, and Fabian is working for the UID team. Is the team who was releasing Axis, one of the members of the Axis release. And we're gonna today do an overview of Mojito. Really ramp up. If you guys don't know anything, that's the first place to be here. So as I talked to you before, I'm gonna put the slides in full screen because it's not really worth it. So as I explained you before, Mojito is an MVC framework which allows you to build applications for multiple devices, mobile, any browser, and it allows you to do it in a way that is really simple to do it. Also, another advantage is that you write everything in JavaScript, which means that you share components. Everything is written in JavaScript, so you can write either on the client and the server on JavaScript. And then we're going to see today a couple of features. For example, how we can ship or how we can just move components across boundaries. Like, let's gonna say that we're going to ship some stuff to the client or to the server. We're going to see how we can do that, and how we can do that even in leveraging multiple devices. So that's what we're going to be focusing today. So first of all, the thing is why we choose, or why Yahoo choose the Mojito name and the cocktails name. So one of the first thing I found when I was ramping up with Mojito was like a Mojit. What is a Mojit and what the Mojit means? So that was not really clear on first, so I want to explain it that. So Mojit, the name of Mojit came when we want to try to aggregate a widget and a module. So basically, on the client side, we can see a Mojit as a part of the page, as a widget. Whereas in the server side, we can see it as a part of API or a package of functionality, a module, where we can reuse across multiple places. So to give you a quick idea, I'm going to put one of the projects we're working on. As you can see here, it's a normal page. As you can think in a Mojit of a little part of the page, for example, the header is a Mojit. This little part on the left is another Mojit. The results are a composite of Mojits, and so on and so forth. So basically, every Mojit is a piece which is kind of MVC. It has his models, his controller, views, and a little bit of more extra pieces that we're gonna talk a little bit now, so you can understand the application. So let me go really quick here on the full screen. So we had this Mojit, which everyone is familiar with this kind of architecture, which is model view controller, right? We have a controller which contains our logic, we have our view, which is contained in the HTML, and then we have the model, which is the one who does the backend calls or whatever other extra database or storage. So on top of that, a Mojit has assets, which basically are the CSS and some JavaScript and sprites and whatever other things we want to put in our Mojit as a resource, right? More than that, a Mojit has it can have dependencies on other YUI modules. Let's say on the client side, we want to use a scroll view, or we want to use another YUI plugin, or whatever YUI module. So we can include that in a Mojit. And also, an important piece here is a binder. Binder is a piece which works on the client and is the one who allows us to change the DOM and manipulate the DOM, and is the piece which is going to try to allow us to communicate back to the controller. And so the important piece and the most important part here in Mojito is that every Mojit, as I told you before, can run either on the client or on the server, right? So all of these pieces, or at least most of them, you can decide on runtime where do you want to run. So we can decide that the model is going to run on the client because I'm in my mobile device and I don't have a really huge bandwidth, so I want to ship that to the client. Or all the way, or on the other side, you can do the same or the opposite with the view model and so on. So the important part here is that you find the new piece binder, which is one of the core pieces of Mojito, and then another little piece which is in the middle, which is the piece which allow us to abstract this communication back with the server and the client. We will see that in the example. Don't worry about if you don't understand the concept now, because we're gonna see it in detail each piece. So basically, as I said, all these pieces can be shipped either to the client or the server, and we will see why and how. So all of these pieces, it seems that my laptop ran out of. All right. So every piece has an affinity. An affinity is defined as a part of the component which defines where this component runs. It can run on the server, it can run on the client, or it can run on both. For example, this is how we can set up an affinity for a controller, right? We can just define, put in a name where we want to run, and we can choose on runtime, decide if, for example, if it has affinity common, we can decide that the controller is going to run on the client and on the server. Again, don't worry if you don't understand really on deep that. We're going to see it with the exchange.
So are those names then hard-coded, or are they configurable?
Yes, that name you have to...
The controller.server, controller.common.
Yeah, so by default, if you put a controller.servers, it means that never is going to ship to the client, and the pieces on the client side is going to take care of abstract communication, so you're going to be able to access the controller, but it's not going to be on the client. You have to do a request, and then this request is going to do whatever it has to do and return the value as it was a normal. It's kind of a normal application, right? You do your just request or whatever, pretty much. We're going to see the difference, and you get the data back. So this happens on the server side. Whereas if you put common, you can decide on runtime if the control is going to run on the client or it's going to run on the server. So basically with a configuration parameter, you can say, all right, so now the controller and the logic for the controller and all these models and dependencies is going to ship it to the client. And then instead of doing when you do an AJAX request or when you do a model, the request is going to be on the client instead of in the server. We're going to see that in a minute. So if you guys wanna go with us on the application we just ran for this presentation, we have it in GitHub available for everyone, and you should be good to go. Mojito start, you download Mojito. Fabian is gonna explain you how, and then basically you can go with us to in every step. So just to show you now really quick the app, we're gonna go now to our app. So if you go to GitHub and download the app, this is what you're gonna get when you start Mojito, right? I'm just gonna show you really simple what it is. It's an application which basically takes our location and calls a backend to get our. Let's restart this. Actually I don't have Mojito started. So you see I have here the GitHub downloaded. So basically I'm gonna start Mojito and everything runs. Alright, so now I'm gonna start my server, and basically if I'm gonna click here, we're gonna get the local weather, right? And we're gonna have some other extra features we're gonna talk about here, for example, show the tweets. So the application is not really complex, but what we're gonna explain in deep is how we can write the application and how we can easily change where the logic is running and how all these dependencies are running either on the client or on the server. So I'm gonna now pass the mic to Fabian, which is gonna explain you how to run, how to start with Mojito and with the dummy application, and you're good to go.
So thanks, Diego. This is Fabian now here. So let's say you are at home with your MacBook and you want to build such a simple application that displays the weather or something like that. So what we assume is that you have Node.js installed, and if you didn't do so already, we would recommend that you use NVM to install Node.js, which allows you to install different versions and so on. You find the pointer to that on our GitHub page. We have a README there actually with some quick start steps. Also then, you have to install Mojito with npm. All right. So yeah, we assume that you use the command on our GitHub. So that looks something like this, which means you will get a fairly new version of Mojito that we know is stable, and we consider a very good starting point, since you will not encounter any unexpected bugs, and when you get started you probably don't want to be at the bleeding edge and run into bugs or other issues. So now that we have Mojito installed, we can verify that it's running. I just used the version command to make sure I'm ready to go. And now Mojito provides a command line interface, which is similar to, for example, Ruby on Rails. If you've ever been working with that before, you will like that. So we can create an application. We just call that Hello World. And now inside our, so we switch into our application. And we see that Mojito created an application skeleton for us. Now Diego has been talking about Mojits, and there are no Mojits in our application yet. So Mojits are where the real work happens. So we create a Mojit with a very similar command, and Mojito now creates a Mojit for us called Hello, and it creates a Mojit skeleton there as well. So we don't want to spend too much time with this Hello World app, but let's start it. And Mojito shows me immediately that my app is now available on localhost and on which port it is running. So I go here, and now because it's just a skeleton app, I didn't do any configuration. I don't have a nice route to access my application, so I have to use this notation where I put the name of the Mojit that I want to access and then the action that I want to run on this Mojit. And this view that you see here now is just the standard skeleton view that Mojito provides. So if we look at our application that we just created, we see a few files. One of them is package.json. It's interesting for those of you who are familiar with NPM. So NPM provides a registry of JavaScript packages that you can reuse in your JavaScript applications. You can specify them as dependencies in your package.json. So everything that's on the NPM registry, it will work with your Mojito application. You can add it as a dependency. Also some other metadata about the app, like who created it, and so on. But this is a too complex topic for today, where we just want to get started. Besides that, we can see a file called application.json, which is the basic configuration of our application. We will talk about that later when building our app. And yeah, that's about it. Another file we see here is routes.json. That would be your entry point if you think the URL that I just showed is not beautiful enough, so you can create a route to that action so that you don't have to type the at and all that. There is just one question I see here in the chat about differences between Mac and Linux. No, mainly not. If you use NVM and NPM, they both work on Mac and Linux, and you can get started in the same way. Full disclosure, on Windows, I never used Windows to do any Node.js development, but I hear that those tools might be available as well. So when we look at our Mojito skeleton real quick, we can see that the pieces that Diego was talking about are being created. We have a view there, which is a mustache view. We have some model, and we have the controller. And now you can see the affinity here in the controller. It's server, which means that this controller should always be executed on the server and cannot run on the client. So now that we know how to use Mojito on the command line to create an app, let's, in the interest of time, jump to how we build our weather app, how we modify the source.
All right. So just to remind you again, really quick, that's the app we're going to be building today, or we're going to show how it works today. So feel free to, again, go to GitHub and, well, now I don't have the server started, but so we're going to go slowly and see which are the pieces. So as you can see here, this is my app. This is my, I'm using Sublime for developing. So I'm going to start with where Fabian let it off, which is routes. So basically, when I type in my server, I'm going to start really quick so you can see it. Mojito start. All right. So if I go to the app now, you see that now I'm getting the main page, right? So the way it works, now we go to routes, and is how Mojito decide which Mojito execute or which controller execute. As you can see here, there is the home page, which basically then say, all right, when I get a get petition, get request with a path in the home page, in the home root directory, I want you to invoke HTML_frame.index. HTML_frame is the name of the Mojito, and index is the action on our controller we want to execute. So you may well wonder what is the HTML_frame. So I'm going to explain you why. What is this? So let's go back to the application.json that Fabian just showed you. Application.json is where you define your application configuration and everything which is related to the application itself. So as you can see here, I have as you can see, it's an array which contains objects. And the most important part is here we have setting master, which basically defines the context. This means that for the common configuration, you're gonna get all this configuration which is showing here. Then we have the specs, where we define which are the modules our application is going to use. We can have here a bunch of modules and only use a few of them if we wanted to. So basically here we are defining master, which basically we're saying, all right, I have a module which is called weather, as Fabian created before, like the hello module, and then we're going to give it a special name, master, so Mojito will know a bit more. It's kind of an alias. Then we have another module, and this is special Mojito module. This module is called HTML frame module, and basically it allows you to create a wrapper for your modules. As you saw before in the Fabian's presentation, the source code was very simple. It was not even an HTML wrapper. There's no title. There's nothing more than you put in the view. So HTML frame basically gives you the wrapper. When I'm talking about wrapper, it's this thing. For example, what it does, the HTML frame is creating all that for you. You see the meta tags, the title, and then on top of that, it's going to add whatever you ask it to add within your modules. For example, assets and all that. So think on the HTML frame as a container for your modules. Then we have a bit of the configuration. We will see now. Deploy to true is one of the main parameters on Mojito where we are going to focus today, which is the piece which allow us to say to tell Mojito if we want what we want to deploy, and say to true, we're saying that I want Mojito to ship everything on the client, or all the parts he needs on the client, because I want to run as all the parts which can be run it. Of course, you have something like server is not going to be deployed, but every piece, for example, controllers that are common or client affinity, models that are common or client affinity, everything should be deployed to the client when needed. Don't have it to be on the preload, or we can dynamically load it. We'll see that in a while. Title for our web page, HTML frame title, nothing important there. And the child. The child basically, as I told you before, is a container, and I'm saying right, this module has a child, which is the master. And master is the one we defined before, which is our weather module. So basically now we are saying, all right, I want this HTML frame which gives me the wrapper, and inside that, I want to create a master module, which is the weather module. And then some assets for configuration, which is not really important right now, and pretty much that's it. This, we can skip it for now. Alright, so basically we go back to the routes, and then we know that now we know the HTML frame, which go to the action index, and by default, because I have this child, it's going to execute my module here. So let's go now to the controller. You see that now we have controller the servers, which means that the controller is going to ship to the client. So what is the piece? So let's say we have here the index. As you saw before, index is the action we're going to execute, right? So we're going to go over really quick about what's happening on the logic on the controller. So we're going to try to get parameters here through this sentence. What is this AC? AC is an action context. As you can see in the documentation, action context is basically that provides access to everything in Mojito. It's the Mojito API internally. You can access here all related with the request, all related with the things which are loaded for this particular request. Let's say which modules are being loaded, which other configuration we have. Everything is accessible through this AC. So, for example, here we are getting the URL parameters if there's some using this API. So basically, we are using a component called params, which is an add-on. We will talk about that later. And we will just get the get URL and the get parameters. Because right now we have none. Basically, we're trying to get you have longitude and latitude to get our location. And so we don't have it. We go here. We go to the else. Basically, what we do here is AC.done. AC.done is the method which basically tells Mojito, all right, my logic is done. Whatever I have here, whatever I put, whatever data in here, I want that to be rendered through the view. So now we go to the view, and the view basically is a mood template. We can have also handlebars if we want, not now, but it is normal HTML page when we have basically the data, if there is some, which is going to be populated with. And it's really simple. We have a special tag, which is the Mojito UID, which is the one who allows Mojito to know where is this going to be rendered on the client. We will talk about that with the next piece. And basically just raw HTML with a normal mood template where we define our little values here, you see temp and all that. So this is what we're going to ship to the client. Right? More than that, when we ship that to the client, we're going to go back to the page, and then go again here. Everything happened, the controller happened, and so Mojito, because it's deployed true, knows that he has to render everything on the client. So as you can see here, all of this is part of Mojito core. It's all the pieces a Mojito needs to be able to render whatever he needs to render on the client. So you see that there's a module proxy. We'll talk about that in a second. And at the end of the day, the most important part we can see now is the binder. You see that now our binder of our Mojito is being deployed. As I mentioned you before, the binder is the piece which allows us to modify and go back again to the server if we need it. So a binder is this piece where it runs on the client always. It cannot be on the run on servers. It's doing DOM manipulation and it's kind of, you can think on the binder as a YUI module. And in our YUI module, what we do is bind the events and pretty much do whatever we want on the client side. So the important part here is, by default, Mojito provides us two functions, which is the init, and in init we get this Mojito proxy. If you do remember, in our slide, we have this piece here, which is the Mojito proxy, which is the little piece which allows us to be able to go back to our controller. Doesn't matter if it's in the server or on the client. As transparent for us, we're going to be able to communicate back with these guys here. Right? So the way it works, we set that by default with Mojito proxy, and then we have bind. What normally you're going to do is doing the binding events of the client side. So as you can see here, this is going to be executed automatically for you. And then what we do here, we say, all right, if we don't have any loading stuff on the page, we're going to bind the button here, which is the click to this button. So basically, this is the only thing which renders, right? The view, the controllers get the data to the view, and now we ship the view to the client, and basically we render it, right? So now when we click this link, what we're going to do is take our location and basically get the location and go back to the server to get the local, the weather, right? So remember that now we have everything set to the server, right? So we're going to focus on what happened, how the things work when the controller is set to server and what all the models are set to the server. We didn't get deep in the models, but it's not really important right now. So we're going to go here and we click here. Let's see what happens. So you see that after I click here, I got a couple of files loaded. So let's go to the binder and see what happened. So when I click on the binder, right, I execute this function, which is basically handle location. Handle location is really simple. We just call the native API of the browser if we have it for getting the location. You can see here we are using the native HTML5 get location. We get the GPS, and with this data, what we want to do is basically the most important part is happening here. Once we get the coordinates, latitude and longitude, we're going to call our controller to say, hey, give me the weather, call whatever model you have to call, and basically give me the render data back. So as you can see, the most important part happens here. We call our Mojito proxy, which is the little piece which basically allows me to go back to our controller, and we say, all right, I want to refresh the view with these new parameters. So basically, refresh view, we're saying, I want to load again the same view as it was before, but now I want to pass some parameters so you can do something different. So now this is going to go to the controller. The Mojito proxy will know if my controller is on the server or on the client, and regarding that, it's going to do the appropriate thing. So in this case, because controller is affinity server, it's going to invoke a special tunnel, which basically is kind of an AJAX request, but Mojito specific. Basically, transfer for me. Mojito is going to call the server side and call the controller, transfer it for me. We will see that changing just the affinity, we will do the same thing on the client. So then, basically, my controller is invoked again, right? And what's happened now is now we have this longitude and latitude. So what will happen now is we're going to call our model, and we're going to use YQL now to get the weather. So let's really quick go to the YQL model. We are using a weather table where we pass the longitude and latitude to the YQL table, and it's pretty much like is equal. Select from weather where my position, where this place in Flickr is. We're using another table here, but it doesn't really matter. Basically, we pass the latitude and longitude, and when we get the result back, we just invoke in the callback. You see, we are basically when we finish the YQL query, return data, and basically here on data return, we are just parsing the request back from the server for the YQL response, and we send it back to the controller. So in the controller again, what we do is we have the data here back from our model, and what we do is just send it to the view. we say, is it done? I'm done with the data, render it on the view, and do whatever you have to do with it. So then the view is populated again, the view is fulfilled with all these values we got from the model, and now in our binder, Mojito proxy get the data back, and automatically for us, it's going to refresh everything. It's going to reload the view, put it in the DOM, and basically we can do whatever we want after. So for example, I have this function here. When you finish, after refresh this view, I just want to, do some stuff here, rewind the events because I have more data back. So now basically what happened is I render the whole page. I render the weather. I render for my location. If you try it at home, you're gonna get your location, and we're gonna have some extra links here, like for example compare temperature and show tweets, which is gonna do another call, but this is gonna be Fabian talking. So I think for now, I think it's pretty straightforward. Now we're gonna see how we can tweak Mojito to change how our application behaves, just changing a bit of the configuration. So I'm gonna pass Fabian here.
Yep, so thanks again, Diego. So now we're going to take a look at the tweets and how they end up in the page. So as you've already seen, when we click this Show Tweets button, we load tweets that are somehow related to our location, city, and we get that through the public Twitter search get API. And what happens when I click this Show Tweets link, as you've already seen, sorry, inverted scrolling. What happens is that so you can see that we have this tweet button bound to the Show Tweets function. And what Show Tweets does in our binder, it uses again the Mojito proxy to call the controller, which at the moment, as you can see, has server affinity and resides on the server. And when the response arrives, we call the render tweets function. So the Twitter action in the controller is fairly simple. It just invokes the Twitter model and then uses action context.done with a secondary parameter called JSON, where we specify that we want to return raw JSON data to the client. This means we will not render any views. And the model, again, is simple. We just have one method which allows us to call the public Twitter API. And in this case, we are using YJSONP, which is a YUI sugar method. Before we've been using another YUI sugar method for YQL. So this shows it's really easy to access any kind of APIs with the help of YUI, because YUI is always ready and available for you in Mojito. So now when we get this, when we send this JSON to the client receives it and then uses the render tweets function. What the render tweets function does is that it uses again the Mojito proxy, and we tell the Mojito proxy, hey, here is some data, and we render the Twitter view with this data. And this is again asynchronous, and as soon as we get the rendered view as a string, we can append it into our page. And this happens on the client. So let's see. Let's look at the net panel here. You can see that when I click the Show Tweets button, Mojito realized that we told the Mojito proxy, hey, first we make this call to the server where we invoke the action on the controller, and after that we tell the Mojito proxy we want to render view. The Mojito proxy realizes it doesn't have that view, but the view is available on the server, so it downloads the view from the server and then uses Mustache on the client side to render it. And now we're going to try something interesting. So far you've been seeing those tunnel requests in the net panel where we always invoke the controller on the server, but let's say that for some reason, maybe our app is becoming really popular, our servers cannot take the load anymore, so now we have to let the client do more work. So let's say we want to ship our controller and models to the client so that our application is almost completely running on the client only. So what we do first is we rename the controller. How does right click work in your MacBook? Okay. So what we do is we rename this to controller common JS. This means that now we are telling Mojito this controller can run both on the server and the client. And you see the controller has two dependencies, our YQL and Twitter models. So when we look at them, they are still with server affinity. So our controller would not be able to execute on the client because it's missing its dependencies. So now what we are doing is we are also renaming both of those models. And you will see that we used y.yql and y.jsonp. And if you've done YUI development on the client before, you will know that most likely they will execute on the client side without issues. So let's restart our application to get this, this change into it. And reload our application. And now you can see nothing changed so far. But now when I clicked the button to retrieve the weather information, we can see in the net panel that quite a few things are happening. First of all, we are retrieving the controller from the server to be able to execute it on the client. And when we do that, we also retrieve its dependencies. So for example, the YQL model, for the YQL model, it depends on the YQL YUI module that is also retrieved. You can see the Twitter model is already retrieved because it's a dependency. And now you can see here, which is kind of the proof that we are really running on the client. You see we are calling YQL now from our browser, not from Mojito on the server anymore. And now also the index is rendered on the client. So by simply renaming those files to common, we changed where they run. By default, if we call the Mojito proxy, Mojito will try to run them on the client. And same goes now if we click show tweets. You can see there is a call to search.twitter.com. Our Twitter model executes it now in the browser. And so this is how your PCs can travel between the client and the server in Mojito. And another thing that we put into our application is a feature to convert the temperature. So I click this button and it converts between Fahrenheit and Celsius. So how did we realize this? Again, starting point for client-side actions is always the binder and the bind method, because in the bind method we bind elements and their events with functions that handle those events. So here we bind the toggle button to a toggle temperature function. And in the toggle temperature function, you can see I'm using a YUI module called convert to convert between Fahrenheit and Celsius. So now we can see how, if you have, for example, existing YUI modules, how you can plug them into your Mojito application. You can simply specify them as a dependency of your binder. So I called my module convert temp. And so whenever this binder is loaded, it will try to load its dependency. And since it's not, the dependency is not a binder, it's an ordinary JavaScript YUI module, it's in autoload and it has common affinity because it can, as you can see from the source, there is nothing client or server specific. You can really execute that module anywhere. And you can see it's a standard YUI module where we just augment the Y object so that people can use us. So this is how ordinary YUI modules can tie into our binder to realize, for example, a functionality like conversing the temperature. And just keep in mind that the name here that we require and the name under which we add the module, obviously they have to match.
So in general, if you're talking about module requirements, then if the fewer, well, I guess if you don't have any node-specific or DOM-specific requirements to it, then it's more likely that you can promote that into a common affinity, right?
Yes. So as soon as you have anything that requires the DOM, so for example, if you want to have common affinity, you want to use IO base, not IO, because IO uses the DOM for some things. You want to avoid the DOM, and then you can go for the common affinity as soon as you have the DOM. Now with YUI 3.5, by default, the DOM is not available on the server anymore, so your file will not run unless you specifically inject the DOM as a dependency into YUI, which is discouraged for performance reasons. So now that we've covered our app and its functionality, I'm going to hand over to Diego for a quick summary before we will look at two last really cool features of Mojito, where we will show you how to do unit tests, documentation, and JSLint out of the box, just with one command on the command line.
All right. So just to recap, I'm going to mention a couple of things more. This was an introduction. There's more things. Actually, we forgot that show you guys a lot of things. So as I mentioned on the first, Mojito also provides you a really simple way to develop for multiple devices. So if you notice here, there's a view which basically has a little affinity. The affinity can be either if it runs on the server on the client, but also it can have specific dimensions. So in this case, we want also to have a specific view, even specific access for an iPhone. So I'm going to launch here, I forgot to launch it, iOS Simulator, and I'm going to run the application on the iPhone. So Mojito for us also can pick specific, for example here, what's going to happen, Mojito will know that I'm my user agent is an iPhone, and instead of loading the ordinary view, it's going to load the special view for the iPhone. And we can do that also with any other component. We can define our controller to be specific, have specific logic for an iPhone, or to have specific logic for whatever we want. We can augment this dimension, we can create our own. So it's really powerful. So we can pretty much do any specific device without having to rewrite a lot our app. So I just want to launch it. As you can see, it works perfectly. And if you can see here, it's rendering the iPhone view, because if we go to the view, it's loading this text. Get your local weather, iPhone user, right? So it's loading this iPhone view. Just to give you a quick example, and everything works perfectly fine as it was in the browser, which is really, I think, amazing. We're not gonna get deeper. We probably in further lesson we can get deeper in how we can augment all these things, but just to let you know that we can do that. Another thing to bear in mind is that maybe you will say, all right, but if I ship everything to the client, I'm doing hundreds of requests here. I'm doing a lot of requests. So there's a project called Shaker, which I'm one of the main developers. And Shaker basically, what it does for you is augment Mojito and allows you to roll up and minimize all these assets for you. So basically, instead of having to request all these YUI dependencies, YUI modules, all these things that Mojito will do for you, and all the requirements and the calculations that Mojito does for you, you can roll it up and only request one single file and one single CSS per request or per context. And also you can also lazy load and defer whatever parts you want. So it's the power here is that you can pretty much configure and do whatever you want, and the performance is still gonna be really good, because then you don't have to load all these scripts on the client. So you can check in the GitHub. There's a Shaker module. It's just open source as well, so if you want to check it out. But this is gonna be for more complex and more advanced applications, just to let you know that it works, and you can do things like that. And the last thing I want to mention is that in this application we just have one module, but think that your application, it may have 20 modules. As we go back for one of the sample we're working on in my team, is that this application has 40 modules. So the way it works that we can be able to communicate one module with each other using also the module proxy. So Mojito also thought of that, and we can do pretty much whatever we want to be able to say, all right, when I click this button, I want to be able to refresh this part of the module, or to tell this module to refresh itself, or when I click here, or when I search here, things happen. So the same as you do with a normal YUI module using the events and fire and listen, Mojito provides you a way to do that module-wise. So you can use just your entire Mojito proxy infrastructure or Mojito infrastructure to do the same. And again, every Mojito is independent, so you can decide that one Mojito can run in the server and one Mojito can run on the client, and even can tweak more than that in switch when and which pieces are going to get deployed. So and when. So pretty much you have control about everything. And the simple thing is you don't have to change your code a lot. You just have to change affinity. You have to change some parameter on your application to JSON. That's, I think, one of the main and amazing feature of Mojito, that you don't have to change much to get everything working on devices and depending on the environment. So to finish our talk, I think Fabian is going to talk about how out of the box you can do a testing framework, and you have the docs also built in Mojito.
All right. So one last time, I want to show you 2 or 3 features that I think are a real selling point and an advantage of using Mojito. So why don't we start with easy testing? So you've seen my YUI module before that I created for this app, or we created to be precise. And you can see our Mojito also has a tests folder, and in this folder we have a test. And for simplicity, I gave it server affinity, so I don't have to worry too much. I just execute this test on Node.js because it's just testing some mathematical logic. And you can see it's a standard YUI test, nothing fancy there. And I just have 3 simple methods with asserts in them. So now if I have Mojito installed, I don't have to spend any further time setting up YUI test or whatsoever. I'm just in my Mojito app and I say Mojito test app. I hope you can see that. And now if I run Mojito test app, Mojito will find my tests for me. It will execute them, and it will generate a nice report. So
yeah, I love the way that how the tests are integrated in there. That's great.
Yeah. So if I make some changes to my convert temperature, and you can see the test fails right away. So this is a way, like as a developer, it's really nice. Before I commit, I just run this simple command, and there we go. And it even provides test coverage for me. So I add a -C switch to that. I tell Mojito I also want to generate a coverage report. And now I open this coverage report, and because it's a very simple thing here with only 4 or 5 lines of code, I easily achieved 100% coverage. But in a bigger project, I would see like 10 or 20 files listed here. I can click them, and I see line by line how many times has this line been executed under Mojito test, and is it covered or not. So that helps me a lot as well to assess how well I'm doing on functional tests. For example, at Yahoo, we actually use this feature that internally, if I want to publish an npm module, which is like I want other people to reuse my code across teams, I have to reach this bar of 80% test coverage for unit tests. There is also integration with functional tests, but we don't have time for that today. One more thing we integrate nicely with is YUIDoc. There are some Python modules that you need to install today. We have the command on our GitHub. we have a pull request on Mojito for migrating to YUI.js. Hopefully we can get that in sooner than later, but for now it's the old Python YUI doc. But it's already really cool. So I can say, here there is a docs command, so I can say Mojito docs app weather, for example, and then YUI doc is running, and it generated the docs for me that I can just open. And I think everyone is familiar with this view, a nice YUI API doc. For example, my convert module with its 2 functions, our weather module, which contains the controller, as well as the 2 models that we created. So this is also really handy and helps you to do documentation efficiently, and you can do it right in your source code, and you don't need to spend much of a setup time to be able to generate it. You don't need any third-party tool or whatsoever. And the last thing I want to show today is how Mojito helps you with JSLint. And as you can see here, we can run Mojito JSLint app. And it found 4 errors. And in newer versions of Mojito, there is a -p switch that will print the report to the command line. But in this 26, we have to open the report in a browser. And you can see it tells me immediately there is some unexpected space in my controller, and in the binder we have some indentations wrong. So that also helps you to keep your code in a very good condition. And if you have a bigger team, you want to enforce the same, you want to agree and use the same coding standard everywhere. So we have JSLint integrated right away, and that helps us to get that right without any further setup as well. So I think that are three amazing features of Mojito as well. And now that it's already 3 minutes after 11,
yeah, but I didn't want to interrupt you. It sounded like you were doing a great job of wrapping everything up, and it really is pretty amazing stuff. I really love the test integration, the doc integration, and having the JSLint in there. I completely agree that when you start getting into a larger project, having that having the code standards in place with lint, and also having the let's see, and also having the docs and coming generated from the code and all of those sorts of things are like they always seem to be those tasks on a project which get dropped in favor of just getting more features out. But if you reduce the friction to actually taking care of those as you're going along, then there's just the greater % chance that you'll have a higher quality going out the door, and as it's maintained over time. So I love the fact that it's so deeply integrated into the framework. So, but let's see, and you guys did a great job of documenting it out on YDN as well. I noticed that there's some piece by piece walking you through getting started, other stuff like that. If you prefer, in addition to watching over the recording of this, definitely go and check it out on YDN. Any other places that you guys want to reference before we sign off? Obviously, GitHub.
Yes. So we have our all the code that we showed today, that we built together today. All of this is on GitHub. We will put this GitHub link everywhere where we put the recording or anything related to this open hour, so that you can clone it. You can run it for yourself. You can play with it. And we have a README file there with starting points, with our email addresses, with our Twitter. So if you have anything, any questions, reach out to us at any time. Go to the Mojito forum, which we also linked for you, and we will be there and ready to help you out and answer your questions.
So I wanna add the last thing. Mojito can be a little complicated to ramp up because there's a lot of not familiar concepts like, for example, Binder and Mojito proxy and all that, where you have to work a bit. But once you get into it, I think it's so magic and powerful what you can do with it without having to do crazy work. As we saw, like we just deploy on the client and server, and we do things for the different devices, and much more features that Mojito has that we didn't cover today because there's like no feasible time to do that. But I just would like you guys to check it out and to play with it, and as Fabian say, ask us any questions or any doubts you have, and have fun.
Yeah. So share your questions and share your feedback on the forums that are linked from the Mojito docs, and also if you wanted to share any feedback on the YUI library forums in terms of its integration in there. And you guys were generous enough to provide your Twitter handles so that we can start spamming you immediately. And otherwise, great presentation, guys. I really appreciate you coming on, and so definitely thanks again for that. And let's see, anything else before we need to close out shop? I'm not sure what the topic is going to be for next week, but you will see soon enough on YUI blog. And you can expect the recording of this to be up on YouTube either today or tomorrow, very soon. And I think that'll have to do it. And so again, thanks for the whole team, and Eric and Jenny and Diego and Fabian and all of you guys. Thanks so much for calling in, and we will talk to you again very soon.